today's speaker, Noel Bradshaw, who's going to talk to us about international meetings.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. How are you today? Good? Happy? Excited? You should be, because today we're going to talk about international meetings and how to succeed in international meetings. So, first, before we start, I just want to introduce myself. I met most people today in the room, so I think I spoke to everybody actually, or nearly everybody. And some of you know me from lessons at D. Morgan. I'm your teacher sometimes. So thank you very, very much for coming tonight. It's great to see so many people here. I think we've got nearly 30 people, and maybe there'll be some more people coming in shortly. So we're going to have a very good night tonight. So I'm Noel Bradshaw. I'm from Cambridge in the UK. Has anyone been to Cambridge before? What's Cambridge famous for? A university, yeah, very famous university. I didn't go to Cambridge University. I'm the COO of D. Morgan. So COO means Chief Operating Officer. Sounds like a very big title, but I manage a lot of people, and I manage a lot of projects, and I manage a lot of operations and processes. So I have to do a lot of meetings. I'm in meetings every day, from usually early in the morning till sometimes late at night. So I have a lot of experience of meetings. My career so far, I was at a company called Accenture. Maybe you've heard of Accenture. It's a management consulting company. I was there for 3 years before I came to Japan. And I participated in a lot of meetings at Accenture. I then came to Japan with the JET program. It's a teaching program. I didn't do so many meetings on the JET program, but I experienced Japanese meetings for the first time when I was on the JET program in a Japanese high school in Amagasaki. Scary. Right? Amagasaki is a lovely place. It's a really, really nice city. And then I came to D. Morgan 8 years ago. And D. Morgan is where I have most of my experience in meetings with American people, with people from Japan, with people from the UK, Birmingham, Scotland, all over the world. We have a lot of different international people in our company. So I have a lot of experience of international meetings. And in total, in my career, I think I spent about 1,000 days in meetings. Not 1,000 hours, 1,000 days in total. If you add up all the hours, it's about 1,000 working days. So I'm very interested in meetings. I'm very passionate about meetings. And I like to see the way that people act and behave, especially among different cultures in meetings. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of that with you today. It should be an interesting presentation. So, before we start, let's do a quick survey. So, I'd like you to raise your hand if you answer yes to these questions, okay? So, raise your hand if you work in a foreign company. Does anyone work in a foreign company? Big hands. We're a Japanese company, Hideki. Well, a little bit foreign. So, some people work in a foreign company. Raise your hand if you have participated in a meeting with participants of more than one nationality. So not only Japanese people. Okay, so a lot of people have experienced meetings with foreigners, not just Japanese, that's good. Raise your hand if you have attended a meeting that lasted longer than 5 hours. Quite a lot of people. It's quite common in Japan for meetings to last longer than 5 hours. Raise your hand if you have fallen asleep in a meeting. Really? Wow, that is amazing. I've never fallen asleep in a meeting. I don't think. That's incredible. That also is very common in Japan for people to fall asleep in meetings. Raise your hand if you have never participated in a meeting. Okay, good. So at least everybody has some experience of meetings. That's really good. And raise your hand if you have ever facilitated or led a meeting. Chairman, moderator. Okay, good. So don't worry, today's presentation is for everybody. Even if you have never attended a meeting, you'll be able to learn a lot. If you attend the same number of meetings as me or more, then you'll still be able to learn something today. Okay? So today's presentation is for everybody. So today we're going to do 3 things. Okay? We're going to understand 3 things. First of all, international meetings are different to Japanese meetings. And when I say international meetings, I'm mainly talking about Western style meetings. That's my main experience. Probably if you go to Africa or if you go to different parts of Asia, then they may do meetings in a different way from what I'm going to explain to you today. I'm mainly talking about American style meetings, British style meetings, Australian style meetings, and also a little bit of European style meetings. Okay? So we're going to understand that they're different, very different to Japanese meetings. We're going to understand why they're different. There are lots of reasons why Japanese meetings and international meetings are different, so we'll go through those today. And once we understand, then you'll be better prepared to adapt. So if you go into an international meeting, you'll understand how you'll have to change your behavior, change your way of thinking to do better in those meetings. Okay? Everybody happy with the contents today? Let's move on. So can everybody see this okay?
Can't see.
You can come forward a little bit. There's some seats just there at the front if you want to move. But hopefully you can see, it's not too bad. So, we'll turn off the lights a bit. That might help.
Sorry, I can go over ahead. Sorry.
You can see? Okay, you can see over here. It's good. So, international meetings are very different. When I first came to Japan, I told you I was on the JET program in a school in Amagasaki, and I attended a big meeting of teachers, and it was funny. People fell asleep. I think the Kyoto sensei fell asleep. A lot of people didn't want to share their opinions, so it was mainly the top man speaking. People were talking in turns. It was an amazing experience for me. I was very, very surprised. But these are some of the differences. So in Japan, participants hesitate to give opinions. So people are not confident, or maybe the people are confident, but it's not normal. It's not an accepted culture to just share your opinion in the meeting. But in international meetings, people always share their opinion. Everybody's sharing their opinion all the time. So it's very, very different. In Japanese meetings, the ones I've noticed, it's mainly the senior people who speak. And maybe at the end of the meeting, the more junior people get a chance to speak. But it's very ordered, very structured. In international meetings, everybody tends to speak a lot more, and everyone's jumping in at different times. Everybody's participating. In Japanese meetings, people talk one by one. So it often goes around a table or around the room. People have something prepared, they present, it gets discussed, and then they move to the next point. If you go to a Western meeting, an international meeting, then it tends to be less ordered, less structured. Of course, there's an agenda, and people follow the agenda. But for each agenda item, there's a lot more discussion and debate and kind of throwing opinions around the room. So it can get very heated in an international meeting. Participants interrupt. Does everyone understand interrupt? So participants jump in before they're asked, and they'll give their opinion. And this can get very, very tough to deal with. So interrupting people. This sometimes leads to conflict. Do you understand conflict? Conflict is fighting, arguing, debating, being a little bit more aggressive. And most meetings that I'm involved in, usually with our senior management team, involve some fighting. And sometimes it can get quite noisy. And then at the end of the meeting, we shake hands and everyone likes each other again. So it's good to have a little bit of fighting and conflict. We get a lot of ideas from fighting and engaging in conflict. So conflict's encouraged. In a Japanese meeting, is it normal to have conflict? No, it's not normal. Yeah, it's very strange. Usually I was surprised actually that it's not normal at all to share your opinions, especially negative opinions, in a meeting in Japan. So usually people will share their opinions in a separate group or in a one-on-one situation, but definitely not in front of everybody. The last point here, details are well confirmed. So in a Japanese meeting, people take a lot of time to make sure that everything is confirmed and written down. In a Western meeting, you'll be surprised. Sometimes people will rush through the points, they'll make a decision, and then they'll move on to the next point. And you're wondering, did they actually decide anything? But they in Western meetings, people decide things a lot more generally than they do in Japanese meetings. Okay, so these are some of the differences between Japanese meetings and international meetings. You can see there's a huge, huge difference. So you will feel frustrated. It's a little bit warm today. So does everybody understand frustration? Frustration means getting annoyed. I've been in so many meetings in Japan with Japanese people, with people that are not from my culture, where I leave the meeting feeling really, really annoyed, almost angry sometimes. I go to the meeting with some objectives, with a goal. I prepared some information to communicate to people, and at the end of the meeting, something completely different happened. Has anyone else been in that situation? Yeah, maybe it's the same meeting. Yeah, this happens all the time. It's very, very frustrating. Frustrating, very frustrating. Okay, so we know that international meetings are really frustrating. We start pulling our hair out. That's why I've got no hair actually, because I've been involved in a lot of meetings. There are two reasons why I think international meetings and Japanese meetings are different. The first one is that the purpose, the goal, the reason for having the meeting is often quite different. And I'll explain about that in a minute. The second reason is that people's behavior in meetings is very different. And the expected behavior. So in Japan, you have a certain culture. It's very different the way that people are expected to behave compared with international culture. Okay, so I'll explain some of those differences. Too far. Okay. Okay, good. So, I'm going to explain a little bit about some of the communication differences. This is the whole reason for having the meeting is about communicating. But the reason often that Japanese people communicate and the reason that we communicate in the West is quite different. So I'm going to explain about two different types of culture. Okay, one type of culture is called high context culture. So context is like situation. So in high context cultures, what people say is not so important. It's not as important. In high context cultures, what goes on around in the situation is much more important. People's feelings, people's emotions, the things that people didn't say are much more important. So in a high context culture, the primary purpose, the main purpose of communication is to develop and form relationships. So the relationship between two people or between a group of people is one of the biggest reasons for communicating. In a low context culture, what people say is very important. So the things that come out of people's mouths are the most important thing. And what goes on around is not so important. So the main purpose of communication in low context cultures is to exchange information, to exchange facts, and to exchange opinions. So the content of the meeting is really important. Whereas in Japanese meetings, the relationships are very important. And you can see, you have this spectrum of countries. So at the bottom down here, we have Switzerland. Has anyone ever been to Switzerland? Has anyone else ever met a Swiss person? Some people have. What did you notice about a Swiss person? Or Swiss people? Matthew, you met some Swiss people. What are they like?
They're
Very
very rude.
rude, yes. Swiss people are very rude. Well, to us, it seems like they're being very rude. But in Switzerland, it's normal. So Swiss people are, to me, I'm from the UK, so you can see the UK is in the middle here. UK, it's not as usual to be so direct. But Swiss people, they say exactly what they feel. If they're angry, then they'll say angry words. and they'll communicate their feeling very, very clearly. And same if they're happy. Right at the other end of the spectrum is Japan. Japan is the highest context culture in the world. So in Japan, it's all about building relationships. And I remember the first time I taught a lesson in our Dean Morgan Shinjuku school. I moved from Osaka. And this is particularly true of Tokyo people. In Osaka, I thought Osaka people were more like, I don't know, for example, French people or Latin American people. But when I came to Tokyo, I found it really difficult to teach because I could not read what people were thinking. I couldn't understand what was going on behind people's faces. It took me a long time to get good at reading people in Tokyo. And it's because in Japan it's a very high context culture. People don't share exactly what they're thinking. They may be hating my lesson, but there's still a big smile on their face. And it's a little bit scary sometimes. So you have this big range of people. I'm from the UK, and my boss is from North America. Everybody knows Dean Rogers. He's from America. Even between myself and Dean, sometimes we both speak exactly the same language, but sometimes I don't understand what Dean's saying, and Dean doesn't understand what I'm saying because we have a slightly different level of context. Dean tends to be less sarcastic. I'm very sarcastic. I use irony a lot. Hiniku. Everyone understands hiniku? It's because I say something and I mean something a little bit different. And sometimes American people can misinterpret that and get the wrong idea. It's true. So we have a lot of very different ways of communicating and reasons for communicating. Okay. So I told you that Japanese meetings are relationship oriented. Oriented means that they tend to be focused around relationships. Not always, but they tend to be that way. And some of the points here are that Japanese meetings are all about getting people together. This is in my experience anyway. You may have experienced something a little bit different. But Japanese meetings are about getting people together. The content is not as important. Often Japanese meetings are about confirming decisions that have already been made. So a lot of the decision making in Japanese companies, it's a long process. It takes sometimes weeks or months. And there's a lot of preparation that happens before the main meeting. So that preparation, sometimes it's called nemawashi. I'm sure everybody knows about that. A lot of one-on-one meetings, kind of preparing for the main meeting. But it's very rare to get a new decision made in a meeting for the first time in Japan. Arguments or debate or conflict is done in private, so behind closed doors, and definitely not in the meeting itself. And this is really interesting. This is something I notice, is that often, of course, Japanese meetings have an agenda. They have an order of running. But often on the agenda, I noticed, wow, they're starting with some really easy topics. They're starting about some very minor issue. For example, why we shouldn't smoke in the room outside, or we need to order some new books. It's not the main issue on the agenda, it's building up to the main issue. So people are warming up with easier topics to set the relationship, to make sure there's no conflict at the beginning of the meeting. This is very different to Western and international meetings. My mouse is frustrating today. Maybe you recognize this scene. This is a joke. Matthew, maybe you can read for me.
Let's begin our meeting. Everybody talk, nobody listen.
This is the chairman speaking. This is very common. Of course, the chairman doesn't say this, but it's a very common situation. The meeting starts, you have your agenda, and then everybody starts talking, and it's bye-bye to the agenda. This is one of our meetings yesterday that we had as a senior management team. We didn't finish the agenda because everyone just started talking and nobody was listening. It's a very interesting scene. So international meetings then. As I said, international meetings are task-oriented. So people tend to focus on tasks. I love tasks. I love projects. I love results. I love decisions. I love getting things done. And if there's too much talking in a meeting and we don't finish the task, I get really frustrated. So I need to focus on a list of tasks in front of me. And a lot of international managers are the same. Not everybody, but a lot of people are the same. So I need to have clear goals, an agenda, and definitely by the end of the meeting, I need to have a clear list of actions. These are the things that we're going to do after the meeting. And if I don't get that, it's very frustrating. International meetings are about making decisions. So we have to get things decided in the meeting. And sometimes decisions will come up for the first time. We haven't had any time to prepare. And someone will ask a question. And at that point there, we have to make a decision. And sometimes decisions are made very, very quickly. And for Japanese people, that can be quite uncomfortable. Suddenly making a decision without making sure that everybody in the room is 100% okay. So you have to be prepared for that. International meetings are often about solving problems. And this is where a lot of the conflict comes from. Because someone will introduce a problem. Different people have got very different opinions on how to deal with that problem. And so that's where the argument and the debate starts to happen. So yeah, the problem solving can be quite good. But problem solving as well can also be about brainstorming. So you often get a lot of brainstorming, a lot of energy in international meetings. People tend to get bored when meetings are very regular and they just have a agenda item, agenda item, agenda item. So people like to have some discussions, some debates, some brainstorming, and it can get very, very exciting in those meetings. Getting results. I mentioned at the beginning, we have to get results by the end of the meeting. If we don't, to me it feels like I'm wasting money, I'm wasting time. If we spend 2 hours in a meeting and by the end of the meeting there's nothing, I feel very empty. So I need to get some kind of result or decision by the end of the meeting. And then this was the opposite of Japanese meetings. So in Japanese meetings, you sometimes start with the easy topics. In the Western meeting, we get straight into the difficult topic where we have the most conflict. It's the highest priority thing for the business at that time. So we want to spend time focused on that and to try and get a decision, to try and get some results on that topic. And that can lead to a lot of conflict and debate at the beginning of the meeting. So you can see the purpose of Japanese meetings and the purpose of international meetings is quite different. Let's move on. Does anyone want to read this quote for me? Who's got a good reading voice? Tommy.
Okay. Americans are like peas in a plate, but Japanese like rice in a bowl.
Yeah. Who can tell me what this means? Americans are like peas on a plate, but Japanese like rice in a bowl. So obviously this is just about Americans, but it can apply to many different cultures as well. Does anyone want to have a guess? What does this mean? Yunko, I think, has an idea.
No.
No? Peas on a plate. What's a pea? It's a little green vegetable. Westerners love to eat. We love to eat peas. So you often for my dinner in the UK, I'll have some fish, some chips, and some peas. And that's it. It's very, very good. So Americans are like peas on a plate. So peas, when you put them on a plate, they roll around. And if you tip the plate up, then they'll fall off the plate. So peas are very individual. They're very independent. They don't sit still. They're very energetic. So there are some good things about peas on a plate, but there are also some bad things about peas on a plate. Because if you tip the plate up, the peas will fall off onto the ground, and then you can't eat them. Japanese, on the other hand, are like rice in a bowl. What does that mean? Rice in a bowl sticks together, works together, doesn't break up, has good harmony, good communication. So Japanese environments are much more like this, much more collective, people working together. So Americans are independent and individual, Japanese are collective. This has a big impact on people's behavior in meetings. So I'm going to go through some big differences between international behavior and Japanese behavior. And you can see at the top here we've got expected behavior and perceived behavior. So expected behavior is what is normal in your culture. What do people expect of you in your culture? Perceived behavior is if you go into another cultural environment, how do people see you? Or how do people view you? So we look first of all at international behavior. So I'm obviously in Japan, I'm international. In my country, I'm expected to be enthusiastic, to have lots of energy and lots of enthusiasm. I'm expected to be proactive and not wait to be asked for something. I take decisions by myself. I'm not waiting for my boss to tell me to take a decision. I'm expected to take risks, sometimes quite big risks. People are expected to try something new, to try to change. These are very, very expected parts of our culture. We're expected to be independent, like those peas on a plate rolling around. Too much sticking together is not seen as a good thing in the West. But when I came to Japan and started talking to Japanese people a lot, I realized that these kind of behaviors are actually not so good in Japan. Being enthusiastic can be seen as aggressive sometimes and a little bit scary. Being proactive or taking risks can be too direct or rude sometimes, or careless. And being independent in Japan is sometimes seen as a selfish thing. We're not looking after the interests of everybody else. We're only taking care of ourselves. So very, very, very different expectations and then the way they're viewed. If we look at Japanese behavior, so Japanese people, these are very good qualities of Japanese people, I think, but Japanese people are very thorough. Does everyone understand thorough? So thorough means doing things to as much as you can, doing things properly, putting in the right amount of detail, and finishing things. Japanese culture expects people to be cautious or careful, not to take too many risks. Japanese people always care about others, especially in a work environment. People are expected to be caring. And people are expected not to be independent, but to be interdependent. So interdependent means you rely on other people and you have to help and support other people. So these are fantastic traits, they're fantastic behaviors in Japan. But if you take those behaviors into an international meeting, then they can be seen in a very negative way. And even when I first came to Japan for the first time, I had quite a lot of negative thoughts about the way that Japanese people behaved. Now I've changed, I've accepted. But at the beginning I was. So being thorough and taking your time to complete things can be seen by Westerners as being slow, not quick enough, which is a very negative thing. Being cautious and not taking risks, not taking decisions quickly, can be seen as being indecisive. You can't decide, and we need to decide things quickly as Westerners. Caring about other people can be seen as sometimes weak or ambiguous. Does everyone understand ambiguous? Ambiguous means it's not clear. I need to be clear. I need to know exactly what we decided. But sometimes in Japan, it's a little bit vague. It's not 100% clear. And this comes back to the context, the contextual type of communication. In a Japanese meeting, a lot of time and energy is spent trying to read exactly what the atmosphere is like and exactly what people are thinking. I can't do that. I've been studying Japanese for 10 years, and I still can't understand exactly the atmosphere. So you have to be careful that you don't appear ambiguous in a foreign environment. And being interdependent, so relying on other people, sometimes is perceived as being very weak. So we're encouraged to be strong and to take decisions for ourselves in the West. So this doesn't mean you have to change your behavior at all. I think Japanese behavior, Japanese society is fantastic. This is why I spent so long in Japan, because I like these types of behaviors. But if you go into a foreign meeting, You just have to be aware that these types of behaviors can be perceived in a negative way. So, we're getting very close to the end of the presentation, and we're going to move on to an activity very shortly. I explained to you that Japanese meetings and international meetings are very, very different. I also explained some of the reasons why they're different. So the purpose is different, and the expected behaviors are very, very different. So how do you actually succeed? And you should take a note of these in particular, because you're going to be using these in the activity later. The first one is know the purpose of the meeting. Every meeting has a different purpose. Some meetings are for brainstorming. Some meetings are for making decisions. Some meetings are for reporting on something. If you know the purpose of the meeting, then you can prepare better for the meeting. You can prepare your English. You can prepare some things to give your opinion on before the meeting starts. So know the purpose of your meeting. The second one here is be ready to give your opinion. Giving your opinion is definitely expected in international meetings. Again, you sometimes appear a little bit weak if you don't give your opinion in a meeting. So make sure you have something to be able to give your opinion about. Be prepared for sudden and quick decisions to come up. They will come up in meetings. People will ask a question, okay, we need to make a decision now. Panic. But you have to be prepared. They will come up. Be ready for interruptions. People will jump in. They will stop you from talking. I remember my first ever meeting when I was a management consultant. My boss asked me to prepare a 10-minute summary of the work that I had been doing. This was for a client. So I spent about 2 days preparing this presentation and lots of detail. And then got to the meeting, and it was my turn to speak. I started talking. One of the managers jumped in, cut me off, interrupted, and then all the other managers started jumping in, and I didn't get a chance to say anything in the entire meeting. This was 2 days of preparation that I took. So you have to be prepared to be interrupted, and you have to be prepared to try and fight. Sometimes it does become a fight. So who's going to talk first? And it's almost a game sometimes that you have to try and work out exactly when can I jump in, when's the right kind of timing for me to jump in. We'll practice some of that today. Be forgiving of cultural differences. It's really frustrating. It can take a long time to get used to these meetings and us strange foreigners and our cultural differences. But just be patient and be forgiving sometimes. You'll get less frustrated that way. And the last one, I'm an English teacher, so I really recommend that you brush up on your English skills, because the better your English is, the more vocabulary you have, the more expressions you have, the better your grammar is, the better your pronunciation is, the more impact you'll have in the meeting. So often something like interrupting, it's easier to interrupt if people accept you interrupting. So you want to earn people's respect in the meeting by having good pronunciation, by having good grammar. They're more likely to think, oh, this person is confident, this person knows what they're talking about. So if you have all of those things, then they'll listen to you. If you show too much poor grammar or poor pronunciation, then it can cause problems. Don't worry too much. You've got plenty of time to study, but definitely brush up on your English skills for meetings. Okay, so those are my tips. We're now going to do some practice. I think that's it for me. We've got a few minutes now. Does anyone have any questions at this stage for me? We'll have another opportunity later to ask questions, but are there any questions now? Last seminar was on question and answer. Presentation, question and answer. That's okay. We'll have lots of opportunities later. So now I'm going to hand over to Matthew. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. Good. So we've heard about meetings. Now let's practice doing some meetings. We have 5 groups. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups here.